Happy Halloween and welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we are going to be finishing up our October series on how to write a philosophy paper with a particularly spooky topic, objecting to yourself. Now, Happy Halloween! As the final installment of the series, we're going to be covering the spookiest part of a philosophy paper, writing objections that undermine your own argument. Now, a great way to end a philosophy paper is to think 2 moves ahead. Imagine yourself in the shoes of whoever you disagree with in the paper, whether that is the author of the argument you just objected to, or anyone that might read your paper and be unconvinced. What would they say? What would they object to? How would they demolish your argument? This can be very simple for shorter papers, offering a response to your objection and explaining why that response is flawed, or more extensive for longer papers, where you're, say, offering a third way, and you might offer possible objections from both of the camps that you're objecting to and show why all of them fail. The objections that you should focus on are objections that are particularly obvious, that anyone might offer immediately upon reading your work, even if they're not particularly good. Just those gut objections of, ooh, that didn't sound good, or that didn't sound right. And objections that are particularly devastating, which if successful, show your entire argument to be off base. Or that you're actually worried about, that you're saying, wow, this argument might be right. You should cover those objections. Don't hide them under the rug, because someone will propose them. And it's best to respond to those objections on your own terms, and get those responses out there early in the original paper to quash that dissent sooner, than to leave that door open for someone to just dismiss your paper as saying, wow, there's a really obvious objection, a really powerful objection that they didn't even mention. This is one point in the process that mentors and peers can come in the most handy. When you've spent time crafting a perfectly detailed argument, you are often blind to its flaws. Fresh eyes can help. In fact, many philosophers throughout history would submit their works to their peers to submit objections that they could respond to in the final version. Descartes' Meditations is a prominent example of this. Basically, you may have certain intuitions that you think are universal, but when you present to other people, they're like, wow, I didn't have that intuition at all. This premise is much shakier than you think it is, because your thought experiment didn't give me that initial intuition. By presenting it to them, you can say, wow, I need to strengthen this particular premise, or I should take that objection and respond to it with something stronger that shows this premise has actually a lot more support, or this intuition is actually much more convincing or widespread. Once you've determined your argument's weaknesses, you need to outline those objections. This should be done similar to outlining an argument from another philosopher. And some of the most convincing are those inspired by existing positions contrary to your own. Be very careful in this not to appear to strongman the objections. Make your objectors as strong as possible. Don't let someone writing a future paper have any possible way in. Try to think 2-3 moves ahead and say, this is what they might object to me, this is the best way that they could offer this argument, and even that is going to fail. Once you've provided the strongest possible objections you can, it's up to you to defeat them and defend your argument. This requirement of responding to your objections may tempt you to weaken those initial objections so that it can be easier to respond to them. Resist this intuition as much as possible. If there's an objection that you can't respond to, you may need to change your initial argument to accommodate it, instead of weakening the objection and therefore straw-manning it and leaving you open to claims of, wow, you gave me this idea for this much better objection in what you responded to, but you came short of presenting that objection and now you have no real good response for it. So if you find an objection that you think you can't respond to, you may need to change your initial argument or work harder on coming up with that clever response. Don't end up weakening the objection. What you may do if you feel you have absolutely no response to a particularly strong objection, but you don't have time, or you still think your argument is convincing, or it's a bullet you may want to bite, you may want to flag that objection and say, I'll cover this in a future paper. That way, people don't think that you're trying to sweep it under the rug, but you're still giving yourself that out to say, I see this objection, I've come up with a response for it, but I'll cover it in the future. In conclusion, once you've presented your responses to your own objections, you are all set. Your conclusion can simply be reframing the central point of your paper. In a shorter paper, it might just be repeating whatever objection or response you had to the existing debate. In a longer paper, it should drive home your central claim and why it's right. When you're presenting your own positive view, objecting to it and giving your responses, you're really arguing for and trying to do everything you can to make the case for a particular position. So, in that final conclusion, don't just use it to say, these are all the things that I've done. Use it to drive home that point. Use it to put that nail in the coffin and get that mic drop of that moment where you're like, wow, there's no way that anyone could object to my conclusion. There's no way that anyone could see some other possible way to get around this argument. This argument is right. Thanks for watching this series. As we said at the beginning of the series, this is just a guide, and you should talk to your advisor or professor or the people that are reviewing your article for publication to get a sense of what exactly they're looking for. This is just one way to write a philosophy paper, or several ways. It's not the only way, and it's not necessarily the best, but it's a place for you to get started from. Happy Halloween. Let me know if you enjoyed series like this. This is different from what we normally do. As opposed to covering a topic in philosophy, we covered how to do something with philosophy, and something that looks more like philosophical methods than a topic of philosophy. Let me know what you think of this series, of this all October long. Happy Halloween. Have a great Halloween. And as always, stay skeptical, everybody.